Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Beneath the Surface. Today we'll be discussing how and why the West support Israel. Joining us on the show is an Arab and Muslim member of the Conservative Party, Dr. Tawfiq Mustafa. Thank you very much for being with us today. Let's start off with why does Britain help and support Israel?
Well, Britain and the West have generally supported Israel for historical reasons. For one thing, the Jews who lived for hundreds of years in Britain and the West have integrated well with the society. One thing, they've contributed to society, and then Israel, when it's created, it became a democracy, can talk to the West in the same language, in the same mindset, and as you know, Israel probably is the only democracy in the Arab world. For example, they don't have a death penalty. All the Arab countries have a death penalty. They have a rule of law. All the Arab world doesn't have rule of law. There's no democracy. There's a lot of dictatorship and authoritarian regimes. And these things have reflected greatly on us in the West. We are attached, we're influenced by what happened in the Arab world. Was it in Palestine, in Iraq, in Egypt, in Libya, or in Syria? So I think that's how the West more or less feel closer and more comfortable in dealing with the Jews and Israel in general. I was yesterday in an event which was for the Jews and Israel, for example, was quite well organized. We very rare as Arabs, or if I want to extend it and say Muslims from the Middle East, can stage a similar event, because Muslims, unfortunately, are badly divided, stratified into the so-called good Muslim, bad Muslim, pseudo-Muslim, the false Muslim, educated Muslim, uneducated Muslim, Shia, Sunni, etc. And all these divisions have created these pockets of political Islam, which plagued and endangered not just the religion, the concept of religion itself endangers the state of the Middle East, which you could see it is fragmenting day by day. A lot of people think the Middle East may be going into sort of Balkanization, but that's totally untrue. The Middle East going into fragmentation, like what you see in Libya today, what you see in Syria by ISIS and Daesh, what you see in Iraq, separation of Kurdish state from Iraq. So,
But sorry, isn't this division already stemmed by the West, saying in the Middle East, like you mentioned the Sunnis, the Shia, there's this whole division in the Middle East. Isn't that already stemmed from the Western ideology? Isn't that their agenda?
I wouldn't say there is a written agenda for the West, because it's not in their interest to see the Middle East go into flame, because as you know, Middle East is a source of energy for a lot of industrialized countries. And it's just bordering the Mediterranean, so it's right in the center of the world and can influence Europe. Can influence Europe by with the migrations, refugees, people who commit atrocities. You can see the beheadings of Western journalists and so forth. So I think it's very complicated. The West have an interest in keeping the Middle East under its influence, yes, but in the same token, we don't have the proper elite and leadership to be able to propel the Middle East countries, the Arab countries, into some sort of, you could say, Southeast Asia country, India, Malaysia, China, or Thailand, where they advanced very well, and Japan. So I think the Middle East haven't got themselves to sort of understand the 21st century needs, the digital age needs. They're still fighting wars of the past, at least wars of words, because they're losing the battles all the time. I mean, I think from reading, as you know, I wrote a book about the Arab world, about Egypt in particular, called Egypt, the Use of Arab Spring. And in this book I explored the idea of the development of political Islam. I think the Arab world have to adapt to the new changes. They have to have a new order. There is countries in the world, particularly in the Middle East, which are not talking together. You're talking about Iran, Turkey, Israel. The countries have to be involved someday. I know there's some issues related to the Palestinian situation, but you're talking about a world of about 450 million people. And 450 million people have got a lot of things in common. They can resolve it to create what you could call it commonwealth, could create some form of political understanding to improve the standard of living of the people, to improve the stability of the region. Because if we stay as we have done over the last 70 years, the Middle East, if you cut it into segments or layers, you'll find every year come worse than the year before. I mean, this year we have ISIS. The year before we have Syria.
But isn't that the actual problem, though? For example, in Palestine, it was able to build itself and kind of develop slightly further, of course, not in comparison to the West, but it was going there, it was getting there. However, in the war that took place over the summer, many bombs took place to the extent where everything was like put to the ground. The schools, the hospitals, the universities, everything was put to the ground. So how are they actually going to develop and become like the West, let's say?
Well, they will never develop to be the West, because Gaza is not any different than any other country, neighboring country like Egypt or Jordan. So they are part of that fabric of society. So I can't see they have to have special treatment. What I can see, development of the Middle East country. The standard of living in Gaza is about 3 or 4 times that of Egyptians, or twice that of Jordanians. So, I mean, if you look at the tunnels, for example, building the tunnels costs something well over $3 billion. So, huge money and resources can to build or dig for tunnels. So, there's a huge economy for a city the size of 1.5 million, like an average city in Iran or in Egypt. So I think that's why I think we should look at the bigger picture rather than take bits and pieces off and focus on it, because that's what happened in the past. Arab dictators and authoritarian regimes have used all propaganda machinery to focus on one issue, which is, say, Gaza. That was all really to deflect what the situation is. In Egypt, about 3 million people living in graveyards, for example. And nobody talk about it because the governments deflect any talking about it or visiting to these slums, which in millions, several millions, for example. And I'm sure you'll find in other Arab countries, but being an Egyptian, I can speak about Egypt. I'm sure you can find it in Yemen, you can find it in Sudan, people starving to death in Sudan. So that's why I think the Arab League has passed its sell-by date. It has proved to be failure. It did not help. If you look at the Iraqi war, the Iraq situation, it has always been controlled by the West. The Western country decide the war and decide the peace. The Western country and the NATO decided the fate of Libya.
How can the Arabs actually take control of this, though?
The Arab will take control if he's still to stop to be too argumentative, to be realist, and to let the real civil society and real educated and well-equipped people with knowledge and know-how to control the countries. Because what you get in the Arab world now is a fighting between the old authoritarian powers and the political Islam. And both of them are locked in a fight, which most likely will destroy each other and most likely will weaken and damage the state probably very badly, as it happened in Libya.
You're mentioning political Islam. Can you please define that term?
The political Islam is the Islam which believe of hegemony of politics as they see it from religious point of view into political application. How I see that? That's what we can see say in Muslim Brotherhood, in Qaeda, and I know you know they are a minority, and I agree with you totally. These people are minority. People in ISIS are minorities. They don't represent 80% of Muslims, but nonetheless, they are very small, but they're very effective, very vociferous, and indeed they can reshape the geopolitics of the Arab world as previous dictators have done.
But these Muslims that are actually doing this, do they actually represent Islam though?
It's not for me to say that, because I certainly do not think they represent Islam, but they most likely will say Dr. Tawfiq Mustafa does not represent Islam either. So that's why I say if we go and demonize each other, because Islam and the religion is a personal concept, personal feeling, not something you enforce in someone and force him to swallow. Islam is practiced in different ways and according to individual understanding and needs. Some people may pray five times, some people may pray once a week. But it doesn't mean this is bad and that is good. The good and bad, how much you serve society, how much you work, how much you give in society and give to people. And Allah will read that for us. But we are not Allahs, we are not the God to judge each other how good we are. How good we are if we pay the law of the land, if we do not steal, we do not hurt each other, that's where the law applies.
Speaking about hurting each other, the situation in Palestine was very bad in the sense that it was actually a genocide. Thousands and thousands of people were killed, including many children. However, Britain just stood there silently, not helping or supporting the Palestinians, the British government especially. Why is that?
But why do you blame the British government stand when all the Arab countries, the heart of Muslim world, did not say much?
I was going to touch on the Arab world later on, but because we're in Britain and the British people themselves went to the streets and protest against the government because they're supporting Israel and not supporting the Palestinians. So many people ask, why didn't the government actually listen to its people when they were protesting? And then, of course, we'll go on to the Arab countries.
It's an elected government, and the elected government have its own way of running politics rather than being pressurized by a demonstration street. You know, Britain is an open society, and you have demonstrations for various things. Demonstrations for gays, demonstrations for people pro-Israel, demonstrations for people pro-Palestine, demonstrations for people pro-Chinese. So it's not the pressure group which is going to make the country or the government of Britain or United States to decide politics. Otherwise it will be easy to use so much propaganda and mobilize people in the street. And that's what we see. It may look unfair, but in the end of the day, it's the British government who are responsible. And when they go to elections, the public will decide if the decisions in many areas, because you don't elect the government because of their position in Palestine. The Palestinians occupy a very tiny part of the foreign policy of Great Britain. I know it might think, because we're in the Middle East, think it is. What about South America? What about China? What about in Africa? There's so many human rights abuses in the world, and the British interests and political output is very important too. So I think we got to look at it ourselves. Did we really do the right thing ourselves? Do you look at Arab countries, the Muslim countries, the Middle East countries? What did they do for various problems, including Palestine. They didn't. They feed one side or the other all the time.
But how do the Arab countries benefit from this? For example, with the situation in Palestine, why didn't they support them? And another question would be also with the situation of ISIS. How come they're not taking any action to stop them from what they're actually doing?
Well, I tell you, you know, ISIS is a very powerful group and took big chunks of Iraq and Syria. And indeed, they control ports, they control oil, they sell oil in the open market, and they gain weaponry worth billions of pounds. So ISIS became a unique phenomenon in the Arab world, which is very dangerous, but it shows you how much vacuum is there. Why didn't we support that? You can say that if you got a democracy, if you got voice of the people heard for, the Arab world still ruled by authoritarian regime which decide what they benefit for them rather than the people they rule. That's why the Arab world is divided and suffer from poverty and poor education, poor knowledge. There's a lot of information, televisions, newspapers, bridges are censored and controlled in every direction. And I have studied that, and it's quite shocking actually. There is no freedom of expressing one's views about what happened in the Arab world if it does not, or if it disagree, if it does not disagree with a particular ruler or a regime. They block you straight away. And of course, in a digital age, they are beaten by the young people, like in Egypt. The Arab Spring in Egypt started by the people, young people, who were working on the social media. They use the social media as their broadcasting centers. And they won over the cumbersome, huge bureaucracy of multi-billion television and the newspaper industry, because the other one was co-opted by the regimes. They became worthless to listen or to follow their opinion because they were politically directed and more or less used as a mouthpiece and propaganda for the regime. So they poisoned the people's minds. And where we got a very divided population. We got divided Arabs, we got divided Muslims in the Middle East. You must remember that Iran, although they speak a different language, for example, they use the Arabic alphabet. The more or less Arabic in Iran is not far off an Arabic in Algeria. So it's in a way an Arabic country. Same apply to Turkey to some extent, although they use Latin alphabet over the last 70, 80 years. So that's why I think the Arab world is in a crisis. The Muslim world is in a crisis. We need a new school of thought, new ideas as it happened 1,000 years ago. At the moment, there is deep divisions in the Arab world. We like to paper on it, but the cracks are too deep. It quickly gets exposed, and that's what we see. We see between the last wars of the last 25 years, the millions of Arabs, Iranians being killed, as you know, between Iraq-Iran war, and the Syrian uprising, hundreds of thousands being killed. In Egypt, thousands being killed. In Sudan, millions being killed. Sudan, South Sudan separated. And that was, Sudan in particular idea is an Arab country, but it's been neglected and been ignored. You never see anybody talk about Sudan. They probably talk about Gaza 20 times more than Sudan. That's what I mean is unfair world. You call it Islam, you call it humanity, you call it common sense. It does not exist.
Going back to Palestine and Britain's influence, what is the Balfour Agreement declaration?
The Balfour Agreement was part of the First World War, outcome of the break of the Ottoman Empire. As you know, during the First World War, there was polarization, like what we see today, between Germany and Britain. Germany have taken Turkey, i.e. the Ottoman Sultan, and Britain have taken Hajj Hussein of Mecca, to their side. And each issued a fatwa against the other. The Sultan issued a fatwa for Muslims to fight for Germany against Britain, and Hussein of Mecca issued a fatwa for Muslims to fight for Britain against Germany. That's where, when the agreement came, the Jews, particularly the Zionists, supported the effort of the war. First World War, supported Britain in particular. And from them, the 1919 conference, peace conference, which was called by President Nelson of the United States, have divided the Middle East, what's called Sykes-Picot Agreement. And Sykes-Picot Agreement carved the area which later named Palestine and gave part of it to the Jews and part of it to the Arabs. At that moment, they were not called Palestinian. There was no official name called Palestinian on say birth certificate or passports, because it was walayat, like Walayat Jerusalem, Walayat Haifa, and so forth. And from that onwards, Tel Aviv was as well about 10 years old, because Tel Aviv was built or started 1919. And ironically, with the support of the elite Arabs, or if you want to call them Palestinians at the time, they supported the Tel Aviv, and they supported the Zionist organization at the time. Things have moved, of course, for and against until Second World came, and at that time Iraq was formed as a state, as you know, from 3-4 groups, and Kurdistan was added to it. Later on, as a kingdom, and Syria was created as well, and Jordan and Lebanon under the French influence, and the other Arab countries. That's how the Middle East started. It is, you could say, a tapestry of contradiction.
Yeah, because why would the Arabs support the Palestinians you mentioned? Why would they support the Zionists if it's not in any favor to them or to their people?
No, the leaders only cared about their own pockets and own personal influence. Some of them were known for the dealings with the Zionist Bank of Haifa, and they got a lot of money out of them.
Is that still the situation today?
I would think circumstances have changed completely. The Arab world became very rich with oil as well.
But why wouldn't they be helping the people that are suffering?
Yeah, but you're assuming people have changed in their behavior and their way of thinking. They have not. We may have changed in our dress sense and our way outlook, but in the real Arab world and Muslim world, people still think in a tribal way. And that is a problem which we have. That's why you're having in Daesh in Syria. People come from London to fight, born in London even, born in America, born in Europe, born in Berlin. They go and fight and kill themselves and be killed and behead others. A lot of despicable work going on in the Arab world. You see, there's something grossly wrong. We cannot just say it is a tiny bit here and a tiny bit there. If it's that tiny, why it was not contained? Even with the negative influence from outside, it shows that we haven't got enough maturity in our leadership to be able to cope and lead the country to safety.
But when ISIS was in Syria, they were kind of encouraged by the Western countries to do what they were doing and the destruction they were doing in Syria. But when they went to Iraq, the situation differed. Why is that?
I think there is, in the Arab world, as you know, there's a shifting alliances, overlapping alliances, contradicting alliances. And sometimes you cannot make sense or can make proper a model of strategy against it, because if the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of picture, which does not fit in any modern type of political thinking. And that's why it's very difficult for policymakers in the West to be able to form a very solid and clear vision. And actually Obama have admitted that in his speeches, as you know. He said we don't have exact plan what to do for the Middle East because of this changing and contradictory situation. Because ISIS, as you know, is mainly, you could, if I may use the phrase, Sunni. And I'm Sunni, or nominally Sunni myself, so I'm not really against Sunni at all. But the fact of the matter, they have committed atrocities in the name of Islam, in the name of Sunnis. They killed a lot of people, Muslims and non-Muslims alike. They beheaded people. They behaved in a very primitive and way, and really evil way. So we got to, we carry blame, all of us carry blame, because all of us, we are in continuous argument rather than connecting with the points which we agree with to build up a consensus of thinking to contain someone like ISIS. We are fighting even the moderates or the reasonable thinkers. They don't come together in the Arab world because they always fight it or being co-opted by the regimes. Some of them are co-opted and paid to disturb the others.
But then you've got scholars in London, for example, be it Sunni or Shia, saying that ISIS don't represent us and ISIS is not part of us. But around the world, you don't really find Sunni or Shia clerics saying this. You may find a bit more Shia, but the Sunni clerics don't state that these people are not part of us. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a big problem. That's what I've been saying, that we do not admit there is a problem. It's like a patient say, I'm not ill, so you cannot treat him because he blocked the avenue for help. So some people will say, that's why I deliberately even didn't want to say they're not Muslims, because they are Muslims, but obviously they misunderstood Islam so badly. That's what our responsibility is, to educate the public and say Islam is not like that. Islam is an open, peaceful, moderate, and modernizing school. Islam is like that. I'm a Muslim, and I respect anybody. I respect someone who would wear hijab like you, and I respect someone who's wearing miniskirt as well. To me, it doesn't make any difference.
Of course. But there are many people from the West, as you mentioned before, who are going to Iraq and to Syria to support ISIS. Why is that? If in London especially, you know, the education is very well, everyone is educated, and most converts, if they were to convert to Islam, they would read many books, and if just by reading the Quran itself, they would know that beheading someone or killing someone without any reason, that by itself is one of the biggest sins, let alone doing what they're doing in Syria and Iraq today. Don't you think that there's something encouraging them to do it? Like, what is encouraging them to do it?
Yeah, what's encouraging? There is teaching in Islamic thinking which can make people go extremist. There is certain parts in Islamic teaching which need revisiting. These people did not create it. I have read it myself, like the word infidel and non-infidel, for example. Good Muslim and bad Muslim. It gives the people the power to use their hand rather than the law of the land to behave and to behead someone, because there is something deeply wrong in the way we understood Islam, because as you know, Islam evolved after the death of Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, into the battle of Karbala, for example, where the way Hussein was murdered, was slaughtered. It was not far off like decapitating people today. And the way have been paraded his head and so forth. So this sort of thing is still going on in a different way. Instead of being paraded on a camel, it will be paraded in a 4x4. So what I mean, the mindset have not changed. For example, anywhere in the world, you never see anybody go inside the mosque and kill himself and kill people praying, or go on a wedding, or go on a funeral. It only happened in the Muslim world. And so we have a problem. If you look back in the early caliphates after Umayyad, Abbasid, you'll find this full of massacres, but we just wanted to ignore them, because even most of the scholars in Islam were not even Arabs. Most of scholars we read for them, they're not Arabs. If you look at them one by one, I studied them for my book. I've read, I was shocked. Very few Arabs, if any.
But you're saying
Bukhari was not an Arab, for example.
Yeah, but you're saying that these schools continue. Shouldn't the West or the government do something to try and stop them from being in the West, for example?
Well, I was hearing the Home Secretary, Theresa May, last night, actually, and she was talking about something like that. Because what happens, a lot of literature, Britain is an open country. It's completely opposite to the Arab world and Middle East. So, literature is there, and literature are all made in countries with radicalism, which encourage radicalism. And there's billions of money spent on that field, in madrasas, in non-governmental organizations which serve some form of cover religion and aid to the Middle East. All these organizations, many of them have had billions of pounds spent on them to support them. The only people who are not being supported are liberals and secular people, because they've been marginalized, and actually they are the majority.
That is the problem we do have, but these type of books you're saying, shouldn't they kind of like censor them from coming into Britain or the Western countries?
No, you cannot censor books.
Can it not be censored in any way?
The Western civilization was built in knowledge, built in exchanging knowledge. I think censoring books will be a very bad sign. I think the Arab world, we are Muslims, good to censor things by being given opportunity to talk out, like program like that. If we talk out, we don't have a voice. The voice is more for extremists, or for what I call it political Islam, in different shades. Because at the end of the day, it is one pool. You can extract the extreme part of that pool. You can extract the voice for us who talk about moderate Islam, which I don't believe is something called moderate Islam. Either you're Muslim or not Muslim. You're law-abiding or not law-abiding. But we accept the Western division of Islam as moderate Muslims and extremist Muslims and radical Muslims and bloody Muslims, and as if, what about people who are Muslims but don't practice as much? Are they Muslims? Are they good or bad? We have to ask the questions about it.
Yes, but what about the situation?
Or Shia and Sunni, for example. When you come up, you find all these divisions, by the way, it tend to be in the Sunni more than Shia. There's another thing which strikes me. The Sunni tend to be very divided. Wherever you go, I attend Sunni Syrian, Sunni Egyptians, every Sunni. I attend their meetings, and I attend Shias as well. And I find the Sunni tend to be very divided, very individualistic. And they don't come with one consensus at one issue, because they fight too much. The Shia, one thing which I must admire in them, I find them, they tend to be in harmony together when they talk on an issue. They have the difference, yes, but generally speaking, they don't sort of fight and kill each other.
But with the situation that's happened in Iraq, especially with ISIS killing the Christians, the Jews, the Yazidis, the Sunnis, and the Shia in Iraq, that on its own has kind of like united us all together in the sense that we're all fighting one cause. You wouldn't find, if there are two Sunnis from different school of thought or two Shia also from different school of thought, they all come together for this cause. But the thing is, however much we're trying to unite and remove these type of groups, we don't know in what direction to go. So can you kind of like tell us how we can try and fix it, in the sense to remove this group?
Well, the thing is that the school of thoughts are well behind the events. And by the time they get thinking, things have moved ahead of them. Because they're always behind and they're reactionary by their nature. You need a modernist idea. You need to get the religion as individualistic feeling, rather than, we don't want any political Islam. Well, I don't want any Islamist, my leader. I don't want them. I'm a Muslim. That's between me and Allah, not between me and every Tom, Dick and Harry call himself Imam. No. What I want it like the West. That's why the Catholic Church is successful. The Catholic Church have got about 1.5 billion people attached to the Catholic Church. Very successful organization, very successful religious organization, and Muslims got to learn from them. You got to have a centralized body, which is a Shia have it to a good extent, at least in each country. We don't have in the Arab world. You have every city and every town in the Arab world call himself, for example, Grand Mufti. We don't want a million Grand Muftis. We want one Mufti, because you're going back again to the First World War, when you've had one supporting the British and issuing fatwa, and one supporting Germany issuing opposing fatwa. We want really union. I mean, look at Catholicism and look at the Protestantism and other churches. Do they fight like us? They don't. We fight like cat and dog all the time.
So you're saying that Islam shouldn't be ruled by politics, or Muslims shouldn't go by politics, by what they actually believe.
Well,
should be
Islam is not
separated.
politics now. Islam is a way of mind and soul to make it do good for life, for humanity, and for Allah. It's not there, because once you put too much politics into religion, or religion into politics, you will end having these beheadings, and you're having the bombs in the mosques, Shia or Sunni. You will having the hate, what we have, because there is something deeply wrong in the understanding of the religion. We need a new school of thought. The first school of thought proved to be wrong, proved to be not equipped to move with the time. And now don't blame them. Why, when the 21st century, 20th centuries, we didn't have a new school of thought? If they were able to have a school of thought in the 10th century, why didn't you have a school of thought now? Life didn't stop. It shows you how people are still depending on old school of thoughts. That's why they are very dysfunctional, unproductive, and rolling back.
Going back to Iraq, many people don't want ISIS to be there. What's the solution?
The solution is we have to re-examine our way of life, our behavior in a personal and a group and communal level, in a family level, interference of the family, interference of the parents, interference of the grandparents, or the head of the tribe. We need to move modern way, and we need to examine our understanding of the religion. We need reconciliation between groups. We want to remove these glass barriers between different groups inside a particular sect of religion, or between the major sects like Shia and Sunni. And this will not going to be removed without frank, open, and transparent discussions. You need education, you need knowledge, you need to open it. There may be some problems by having such process opened, because you're going to have fringes, but that's part of life. You can't stop fringes, because ISIS is a fringe, if you think it, extremist fringe in life. They're not small numbers, they're millions and supporting ISIS. So what I mean, and you find other sects like Ismailis, like Ahmadis, like other sects in Syria, and Jews and other religions, minorities, Christians and Copts, some Maronites. So what I mean, we need really to know that our identity is the land where we are. Religion is not identity. Religion is a personal belief in God and his messenger. Was it Muhammad, or was it Jesus? Was it Abraham, or a Buddha? So it is not our right to compel anybody to believe in what we believe in. That is going to cause harmony. That will initiate love and understanding between people.
You're saying that we should talk, have a full discussion to know where everyone would stand. But the situation is that ISIS are not the type that would want dialogue to resolve the problem, because they have the aim, their goal is to create an Islamic state, which no country is accepting. So what can we, like Muslims or just normal human beings, do, in the West especially, to stop this from actually happening?
Well, the only way you're going to stop it is by acting from within Muslim countries, Middle Eastern countries. As you know, United States, President Obama and David Cameron and the rest of European leaders are in the process of formulating a response to the Islamic State. Military response, logistic response. As you know, they've been a lot of intelligence work, supplying intelligence to other people like the Kurds, and communicating with Iran, communicating with Syria. While we're talking now, the Secretary of State Kerry is in Iraq, involving Turkey. So I think the West is working in its own interest at the end of the day, and they're pragmatic about it. So I think the current landscape of the Arab world, the current leadership, are not capable of moving situation forward, because they're not elected, there's no democracy, there's no rule of law, no accountability. And still there is a censorship. So we need total openness. Even if you criticize Islam, you can criticize it. You love it, but you're going to get stronger Islam at the end of the day. Like the Catholic Church, like Protestant Church, people attack Christ, but they do not weaken Catholic Church, as you know. You still can have millions going to flock to Rome at any given time.
But ISIS as a group, they uprose very quickly. Like within a few weeks, we just see them going to Iraq, and they took over Mosul very fast. Do you think that they would also, will be able to get rid of them as fast as they just came?
Probably not as fast, but the West has to be very careful because of the collateral casualties. Because if you kill a lot of civilians, that will not be accepted by the electorate in Britain. David Cameron, Obama will not be able to face the public if he killed children from school just because he happened to be fighting ISIS. The logical way of explaining to the British public and to Western public is totally different than the Arab world. Arab world accepts this as part and parcel of what's going on. And the West does not accept it, because killing is totally abhorrent in the West, is unaccepted. Also, I want the Arab world to feel the same. Killing is unacceptable. I mean, you've seen a lot of things like an officer, commission officer, kill a conscript the other day in Cairo because he just hated him till he killed him. So this doesn't happen anywhere in the world, hit a conscript like that. So what I mean, you got to have rule of law. And you cannot get a fox to protect the hens. And that's what we are facing in the Middle East. Most of the regimes are type of fox. We cannot trust to move the country forward. What I can hope for, I hope they understand they are losers at the end of the day. They will be in trouble, they may be killed, or they may be haunted by international criminal courts of justice, or they may be haunted inside their country, and like what happened to Gaddafi. We don't want that. We want a win-win.
You mentioned that the Arab countries are not capable of helping or removing ISIS, but the situation is ISIS itself says that it's going to be going into even more countries, and it has a plan to go into the Gulf. Ain't they afraid of this?
I doubt if they'll go to the Gulf, because the West are very careful. When it comes to the oil resources, like when Saddam Hussein took over Kuwait, they moved swiftly, and they destroyed the Iraqi army totally for a country like Kuwait. So I think it's when it comes to that, the West takes a different stand. But the Arab countries, the problem with ISIS doesn't come from nothing. ISIS is supported by some local regional powers in selling and buying oil. If you allow a huge tanker to come and stay all night and day filling with oil to go and sell it in the spot market, that means it's got protection somewhere in the middle. If you can get billions and you can get this huge armaments going to ISIS, huge trucks and anti-air missiles, batteries, that's a huge systems and infrastructure and hardware. So there is a problem. ISIS has got local support, and it's not in its own at all. There is some support. There's some people opposing ISIS, of course, as well. A lot of people opposing ISIS, but the political picture, the Arab League, for example, did not take any action. The Arab League is sitting as bystanders, watching. But if you look at United Nations, is disturbed, is meetings, is raising its voice against what happened in the Middle East. But the Arab world is divided.
But David Cameron recently said that ISIS is also a threat to the West. And kind of, many people on social media started sending these messages that, we're going to be getting attacked very soon by Muslims and so on. Doesn't that actually create fear and worry in society instead of help society go on forward and develop?
Well, David Cameron have expressed his concern and condemnation, and rightly so, against ISIS. And I do condemn ISIS. I think they're a very sinister body. They will damage the Arab society and damage Islam.
But they have actually, and they are in that process of damaging Islam. But
you don't see it this way.
Of course they don't see it that way, because they themselves believe they're doing something right in bringing their own laws and their own so-called Islamic rulings, as they put it, with the whole Khalifa. But the thing is, do we actually need a Khalifa in this day and age?
It's part of the total nonsense, and we never need a Khalifa in any age. The Khalifa was an outdated thing. As you know, the four righteous Khalifas, three of them was killed. And during the second Khalifa Osman, the divisions between Umayyads have come, and by the third Khalifa, by Omar started changes of Caliphate. By Osman it's changed far more, and by the time Ali came as a Khalifa, the Muslim world was divided into what we know about it, which is we always magnified by what happened in Karbala, for example. But it happened all over in Egypt, having the killing of Muhammad, the son of Abi Bakr, for example, and burning his body. Later on, the Abbasid burning the bodies of Umayyads, and whoever come after Abbasid burning the body of Abbasids. You don't know where even they buried, because they've been dragged out of their tombs and burned. So I think we have a problem about us. We deny history. We deny what happened. That's why we cannot learn how to improve the future, because if you want to improve the future, you've got to learn about the past.
Of course, so you're saying that history is kind of like repeating itself in a way.
It's repeating itself because we never learned. We got to learn. That is the first process of reconciliation, is to learn what's gone wrong. It's like an illness. You got to know the symptoms. You got to do investigation of the disease before you treat it. But we denying the symptoms, we denying investigations of it because we think it's going to weaken Islam. If you think that way, it means that Islam is a very vulnerable religion. Islam is a very strong religion and can withstand type of debate like that. And I debated openly with you, as you could see.
Thank you very much for being with us on the show, and thank you very much for watching us on Beneath the Surface. See you next time.